What's going on, fellow growers? Me and Mr. Man are here to show you how to make some carrot top pesto, and I'm going to be eating it with some roasted vegetables. Carrots are his favorite snack in the whole wide world, so might give him a couple to snack on since he's got a stuffy nose. So come on along and watch how it's done. This carrot pesto is a pretty easy recipe. It doesn't really even need to be cooked. Just blitzed in the blender, and then can have it on roasted vegetables, things like that, pasta, and it keeps really well in the refrigerator. A lot longer than normal basil pesto. Recipe was inspired by a recipe in this book, Born to Run 2, by Christopher McDougall and Eric Orton. If you haven't read the first one, it'll ruin you. I haven't missed a day running now in almost 4.5 years after reading that book. So read it at your own risk, but it's an awesome read. Gonna harvest a few things tonight for dinner real quick. Always find harvesting at night seems a little bit spooky. So into the hoop house I go. Oh, what do I see? Some nice freshly refinished handles. First thing I'm gonna harvest is a couple of carrots. They don't always look as great as they do from the store, but they have a couple imperfections, but they're still delicious. At this point, I like to pull off any of the dead leaves that are on there and harvest them. Next up is the beets. Do the same thing. Just take any dead leaves that are not looking perfect and toss them to the side. I try to pull off as much dirt as I possibly can. It just makes cleaning them a little bit easier. These will be really good roasted up tonight. Next up is celeriac. I'm gonna pick up some celeriac. This one was a little rough looking, had some insect damage, but I just trimmed off all the leaves and the roots off at the bottom. Just make it a little easier to harvest. Heading up into the main garden. In here, wanted to harvest some turnips. With the turnips, the greens are usually pretty delicious, but these were kind of aphidy, so I just cut them off and knew it was going to be really cold and that aphids didn't like that. Next day I came and picked them up and gave them to the chickens. Can't resist some good carrots from the raised beds. These things are looking great. They're still looking in their prime. Next I wanted to grab some leafy greens such as parsley. It's the leafy herbs like parsley and basil go really well in this carrot top pesto. Oh, what are those? Garden ghosts? Nope, just row covers over the top of my beds protecting them. Walking back to the house, had to check on the chickens real quick. They seemed like they were doing fine. So here is the haul that we got from the garden with most of the ingredients. I didn't put the basil out there yet, but the harder vegetables, such as the celeriac, the turnips, and the beets, we want to peel them first before we give them a rough chop. Try to keep all the vegetables about the same size. These purple sweet potatoes are a Japanese variety. I believe Okinawa was the type. They're delicious. They're from the fall when we harvested them. Rough chop all of them. Then same thing with the carrots, but we're saving the greens. So you just want to look very close to the stem and make sure that there's not dirt. A lot of times a lot of dirt will hide in there and you can just chop that off to the side. Rough cut the beets. They do make a mess on the board. One thing that's nice to do is just then flip the board over after you cut beets, clean your knife off, and you got a nice clean side. Take your green onion, chop it up, and next you just chop up your lemons to juice them. You want about a half cup of juice. You can use bottled lemon juice, but I had these sitting on the counter and they needed to be used, so I decided to go with the fresh tonight. Grab some garlic, as much as you like. I like very garlicky, so 5 or 6 cloves is good for me. Now that all the veggies are prepped, it's time to cook. You guys were very patient while I was cutting stuff up. Riley, there you go. Annie, there you go. First things first, take your garlic cloves, toss them into the blender. High-speed blender works best for this, or like a bullet-style blender, you might have to do multiple batches. Green onion goes in. Next up is nuts. These are just walnuts. You want to use about a half a cup. That's my calibrated quarter cup handfuls. The next type of nut is a little harder to come by. They're raw cashews. This doesn't really work too well with roasted cashews. Raw cashews can be pretty expensive if you buy them bagged. The best bet to do is find a place that sells them in bulk sections, and you can usually get them a lot cheaper. A really good cheesy component, just like this, nutritional yeast, aka nooch. So we want to put about a quarter cup of nooch in there. It gives it kind of a funky, cheesy flavor, and it's loaded with B vitamins for people like me that don't eat any animal products. So the next ingredient is white miso. Miso paste is not just for soup. It gives also a nice umami, cheesy flavor. So I want about a tablespoon added into there. It adds a good salty flavor as well. Make sure you cover it back up. It lasts pretty indefinitely in the fridge. To this I add about a half a cup of the lemon juice, and gonna just rip the carrot greens in half and shove them on in the blender. Do the same with the parsley, but first I want to just take a little bit off the side and hold that to garnish at the end. I see that the blender's getting pretty full, so I'm going to hold a little bit off to the side, and I'll throw that in there in the second batch along with the basil. Vitamix blenders are quite the investment, but they work great, and you really don't have to strain a lot of stuff when using it. It'll pulverize almost anything. So I had to add about another half a cup of water to this, and now I'm adding the basil and the rest of the parsley, except for the stuff that we're holding to the side for garnish. Blitz it up. You don't want it completely smooth. A couple little chunks here and there is fine. To this, with the blender running, I want to add about a quarter cup of olive oil. You'll see the texture change, and it'll start to get a little bit shiny and get a really nice mouth feel to it. Taste it now, see what it's tasting like. I thought it needed a little bit more salt. If it's too acidic for you, you can add a little bit of maple syrup or honey or agave syrup to it to kind of cut into that acidity, but I like the acidity, especially with all the sweet vegetables that I'll be roasting up. So give it a blitz, and once it's finished, put it in a container, toss it in the fridge, and wait for the roasted vegetables to be done. One more taste. It's perfect. So for roasted vegetables, what you want to do is just add a little bit of oil. It's not too crazy. You can preheat your oven to 425. I'm going to do this in the air fryer. It's just a little quicker, and I don't have to wait for the oven to preheat. So I like to add keep it pretty simple, just salt onto the veggies, and then I throw them into the air fryer at 375 for, this ended up taking about 25 minutes. At 20, they were still just not completely cooked. After 25 minutes, they look beautiful, a little charring on the edge, and the carrots still had a little bit of texture to them, which was nice. It was really delicious in the final dish. To serve this, I took some rice that I made up earlier in the week. I usually make at least one big batch of rice a week, and this is whole grain brown rice. And this is brown rice, and just throw in some of the vegetables over top, and then we can throw a whole bunch of that pesto right on top. The sweetness of those vegetables mixed with the saltiness and the acidity of this pesto, it's just a match made in heaven. This pesto is also really good as like a sandwich spread, or I've added a little bit of oil and a little tiny bit of white wine vinegar to make a salad dressing out of it. I like to add a little bit of fresh parsley at the end to garnish. Now it's time to enjoy with a nice piece of sourdough bread. Well, fellow growers, thanks for coming out today to learn how to make carrot top pesto. It's one of my favorite sauces that comes out of the garden. Great on roasted vegetables, pasta, toast, breakfast, you name it, and it lasts a while in the fridge. So let me know down in the comments anything else you'd like to have me make, and like and subscribe, and see you next time. Happy growing.